Hi everyone, welcome back. I can already tell this is going to be fun. First off, thanks so much for the love and support and comments after the first podcast. That meant the world to me. Now I have since learned that if you hit the subscribe button on YouTube, that you will automatically be notified when I put up another podcast. So if you're interested, just be sure and hit the subscribe button and you should know automatically. Okay. Now, I'm going to assume that you listened to the first podcast and that you know what I mean when I use the word Holland. It is not the country, but it represents the life that we never wanted or expected to have. And you'll remember that Italy represents the life that we had hoped and planned for. So with that in mind, I want you to think back to that time when you felt yourself slipping away from Italy toward Holland, or when you realized that you would never be going to Italy at all. For me, it was in my 30s. I remember feeling complete despair. I thought I would get married in my 20s. And as dating got more complicated and I was getting older and I realized that my opportunities for having a family of my own were becoming less and less, I could literally feel myself slipping into Holland. I remember countless times imagining that I was standing on a dock as the marriage ship set sail without me. I had missed the boat. It was a feeling of total despair. For you, that might have been a time when you realized that the marriage you were in was not at all like you had hoped it would be. Maybe it was full of turmoil or contention or abuse or apathy, and there was no end in sight. Maybe it was the day you found out your child had a terminal disease or was in a fatal accident or had chosen another way of life than the way that you had taught them. Or perhaps it was when the doctor informed you that your baby would be special needs or that you would never be able to get pregnant. Or maybe it was when you or a loved one was diagnosed with a mental or physical disability. I have known many who learned later in life that a parent or a spouse was not the man or woman that they thought they were, but had a secret or immoral life, and as you can imagine, it shook their world. Maybe it was when you lost your home to tragedy or joblessness and had to move into a child's basement or an apartment like you lived in when you were first married. Regardless the reason we find ourselves in Holland or going to Holland, the initial instinct when we first realize that we are headed there is we want to play the role of a victim. Now, I am going to share with you a fundamental truth that will be the foundation of all future podcasts. And it's a truth that has the power to change your life, and I'm not kidding. This is true. And it is the key to happiness throughout our life, whether we are in Italy or in Holland. When someone plays the role of a victim, they usually do one of four things. They either blame someone or something for their attitude or behavior or lack of behavior. For example, my mom didn't wake me up, or my mom didn't give me a ride. My husband makes me so mad. My wife doesn't love me. My kids are driving me crazy. The coach is playing favorites. I'm upset because my friends didn't invite me. Or God wasn't there for me. He doesn't love me. It's so-and-so's fault. And we find someone to blame for our attitude, our behavior, or lack of behavior. Another way we play the role of a victim is we make excuses. I don't feel good. I'm tired. I'm too busy. I didn't know. I'm too old. I couldn't find the keys. I didn't know what time it was. I don't have any money. We have excuses as to why we feel a certain way or why we didn't get something done on time or why we acted the way we did. So we make excuses. Another way that we play the role of a victim is we wallow in self-pity. Woe is me that I'm not married. Woe is me that I'm divorced. Woe is me that I can't get pregnant. Woe is me that my spouse is so rude. Woe is me that I have to work with so-and-so or serve with so-and-so on a committee. Or woe is me that we are never included or invited to go out with others. It's a lot of woe is me because of this or that. So our way of playing the role of a victim is by wallowing in self-pity. Then the last thing that we do to play the role of a victim is we rebel or escape. Children will often do this. They may rebel and turn to alcohol or drugs or immorality and blame it on their parents' divorce or as an excuse to fit in. Instead of acting out responsibly when life got hard, they rebel or escape. They may hide in their room, stay at a friend's, or just take off. It's a way of playing the role of a victim. A spouse who is not happy in the marriage may do this as a way to cope. Instead of taking responsibility in the disappointment of the marriage, they play the role of a victim by escaping to another relationship or taking on more hours at work or burying themselves in gaming or in another addiction. And unfortunately, some even commit suicide as a way to escape. Whether it be at a job or in a relationship, there are many ways that people rebel or escape versus taking responsibility for their lives. They are playing the role of a victim because they don't like the circumstances they are in or the people they are with. Now, let me be clear. In every one of these cases, we might in fact be a victim. It might be true. It might be someone else's fault as to why we are late, or someone really might have been rude or abusive to us, or cheated on us, or hurt us. There are times when we are not responsible and it's not our fault. Those things really do happen. But what I am talking about is playing the role of a victim. That is an entirely different issue versus being a victim. Playing the role of a victim is when we become our own worst enemy. When we play the role of a victim, we are saying, this is not my fault. And if it's not my fault, then there's nothing for me to change. And if we don't change, we don't grow and we are not happy. You see, when someone plays the role of a victim, they stop progressing because they don't plan on changing. Yet, growth means change. So unless we change and are progressing, then we're not happy. Okay, let me give you an example. So I mentioned before that we had a swim school for 59 years where we taught a whole bunch of little kids how to swim. In fact, about 61,000 of them. And people came from all over the country to our place for swimming lessons. And the reason they did that is because it was the fastest method on the planet. Every child would be swimming by the end of the first lesson in deep water independently on their own. It was absolutely fascinating to see. Let me tell you a little bit about how we did this. So the parent would bring the child to us. They were all private lessons, one-on-one. We would take this child into our arms and the parents would go sit down about 20 feet away where they would watch. We would hold this child, we'd kiss and love this child, and then we would take it for a swim. After we went for a swim, the first thing the child did was play the role of a victim. If they were 1, 2, or 3, they would usually cry. That's what they do at that age. They didn't want to get their face wet, so they cried, hoping that their mom would come get them, or hoping that we would say, okay, we won't go for another swim. But that's what they did to play the role of a victim. If they were 4, 5, or 6, they didn't usually cry, but they are bigger, and so they often use their body. They might hit or slap or scratch, but in most cases, they use their words because they could talk, and they tried to negotiate, and they tried to rationalize, and they tried to ask questions to distract us. They tried everything. We have seen it all, and some of them have been so funny and so fun to watch. There was a 5-year-old boy that didn't want to go for a swim. He quickly grabbed his tummy and he said, "Oh, I can't swim. I just got a tummy ache." And the teacher said, "Oh, no, you're fine." And right just that fast, he grabbed his arm and he said, "Oh my goodness, I just broke my arm. I can't swim." And the teacher said, "No, you didn't break your arm. You're just fine." He quickly threw his hands up over his eyes and he said, "Oh my goodness, I just went blind. I can't see a thing. I can't swim." It was the cutest thing. There was a 3-year-old girl that didn't want to jump. And the teacher said, "Go ahead, jump right here on the bubbles." And the little girl grabbed her tummy and said, "I can't. I'm pregnant." It was so funny. There was a cute little 2.5-year-old named Asia. She was one of my swimmers, and she was not a crier, which is really unusual for that age. And we would go for a swim, and then I'd love her and kiss her, and we'd go for another swim. And I was ready to go for another swim with her, and she grabbed my face, and she pulled it into hers, and she said, "Wait, wait, let's just keep kissing." And she kissed my cheeks and my eyebrows and my forehead and my nose all over my entire face. It was the cutest thing you've ever seen. Well, they tried all different things to play the role of a victim. But as long as they were playing the role of a victim, we couldn't progress them, and they were not happy. So we had to stop the victim mentality, and we knew how to do that. And it took us about 10 minutes to stop the whining, the fussing, the excuses, or whatever it was they were doing. The moment they stopped playing the role of a victim, progress was immediate. And the last 20 minutes of the first lesson, they were literally learning how to swim, and they got happy because they were progressing and they were swimming. It was amazing to watch, but that was the reason it was so successful. Now, the same went for our teachers. When we would hire a teacher, we would explain to them, now this is the deal, we're only open 13 weeks every summer. It's a fast-paced summer. And we need you to learn this method fast. This isn't the kind of job that you get it in a couple weeks or in a month or two, because a lot of kids would have traveled through your arms and they need to learn how to swim too. So you need to get the method now, not tomorrow, but now. And the quickest way to learn is to never play the role of a victim. We explain to them there's going to be times that you're not going to feel good. There's going to be times that you were up all night because you broke up with your boyfriend, or you were in a fight with your mom, or there's going to be times that you're going to look and say, well, I thought you meant this. And you're going to say, well, I saw you do it this way yesterday. Well, I saw another teacher do it this way. And all those things really do happen. But if you play the role of a victim, you have stopped your own progress. And there's not enough time in our summer to do that. You've got to catch it now. So don't play the role of a victim. Well, let me tell you something. There is nothing better than working in an atmosphere where no one plays the role of a victim, and no one's whining, and no one's complaining, and no one's making excuses. Our teachers were absolutely amazing. It really does work. When we don't play the role of a victim, we progress and we're happy. It is so crucial. I have noticed that when someone comes to Holland, that is their first instinct. They want to play the role of a victim. Fortunately, there are many who don't go with that instinct, and then there's those that do. I have seen people come here who have just gone through a devastating divorce, and they spend their entire time blaming and wallowing in self-pity. Whereas I have seen others who have gone through a painful divorce, and they use it as an opportunity to change and grow and move forward in a positive way. I know many singles who have never married. Some are depressed and wallow in self-pity that the Lord hasn't sent them a husband. And others are movers and shakers, making a difference in the lives of everyone they meet. It's a choice. It's entirely our choice. Those who play the role of a victim are stuck in that spot. And I see them years later, and they're still playing the role of a victim. They've not changed. They have not progressed. Maybe their story has changed. Maybe the characters in their life are different. But in each of those stories, they are still the victim. But those who take responsibility for their circumstances and their lives, regardless whose fault it is, move on. They progress. They are happy. A great example of this is a guy I know right here in Draper, Utah, named Mike Shalappy. You might have heard of him. When Mike was 15 years old, he was over at a friend's house, and his friend's dad was a police officer, and he had left his gun on the nightstand. His friend picked up the gun and emptied out all the bullets, or so he thought, and then he pointed it at Mike and he shot it. There was still one more bullet in that gun, and Mike has been paralyzed from the waist down ever since. Well, let me tell you something. Mike knew he was not to blame, but he took full responsibility for his new life. Like he said in his book, he's got a great book that is called Shot Happens. Like he says in his book, he goes, I know I'm not to blame. It wasn't my fault, but what good would it do me to spend my life blaming my friend or to wallow in self-pity because I was paralyzed. Instead, Mike moved forward. He took responsibility. He became student body president at his university. He went to the Paralympics several times for wheelchair basketball. I remember the first time I heard him speak. He held up all the medals that he had won in the Olympics, the gold, the silver, the bronze. And the last medal that he held up was the bullet that was pulled from his spine. And he said, of all the medals, this is the one I'm most grateful for. This is the one that has changed my life for the better. What a difference it makes when we take responsibility and we don't spend our time playing the role of victim. Now, I can't go any further without mentioning how crucial it is to teach our children to be responsible and not play the role of victim unless you want them to not progress and not be happy. I can't tell you all the times I have watched parents turn their children into a victim or showed them by their own example how to play the role of a victim. I talked to a school teacher. She was an AP high school teacher who had caught one of her students plagiarizing. She called the student in and she called the student's mom in with her. She explained it to the mom what had happened. The mom turned around and blamed it on the teacher for not having done a better job of explaining the definition of plagiarizing to her daughter. Right there, her daughter learned what it meant to play the role of a victim, to blame someone else. I remember when I was in charge of a youth group. It was a young women's group. They were all 14, 15 years old at my church. With this youth group, every week we would have an activity during the week, and on Sunday we would have a lesson. I was new to the area, so I hadn't met the girls and I hadn't met the parents. But I got a phone call from one of the moms, and she introduced herself and she explained to me that her daughter wouldn't be joining the girls for the next year. She goes, I think we're going to take a year off. And I said, well, why? And she said, because every time she goes to the activity, she comes home sad because the girls aren't including her and they're not being nice to her. And so I just hate to see her so sad. So I'm going to go ahead and just let her take a year off. I told this mom, I said, obviously you're her mom and you can do whatever you want. But I said, first of all, it's going to be a great year. And kids have a way of working these things out. And it'll all work out great. But I said, more importantly, you would be teaching her that when things don't go the way we want, that we just escape. You would be teaching her how to play the role of a victim. And that's the part that I'm worried about the very most. Well, the mom thanked me and she hung up the phone. Well, I don't know what their conversations were like at home, but all I know is her daughter was there every single week. I was so grateful because that was such a pivotal point in this girl's life, to learn to take responsibility even when things aren't going the way that we like. And I'm so grateful her mother turned directions on that. I have heard more parents blame a child's coach or teacher as being biased or boring, and that is why their child doesn't want to participate. At our swim school, we've hired over 600 employees over the years, and they were awesome. But inevitably, we had to let a few go because they were not teachable or hardworking. We usually knew the parents of our employees, so we saw many reactions to firing them. I remember in one case, the boy that we had hired was so arrogant and impossible to train that we let him go at the end of the first day. Sadly, his mother would never speak to us again. It was our fault. And she taught her son that it was our fault, not his. However, there was another scenario that was so similar. There was a guy named Dean. I actually changed his name in case he ever listens to this podcast. I don't want to embarrass him, even though it's an awesome story. But Dean came to work. It was his first day of work. My dad was showing him how to vacuum the pools. He was going to be our pool man as well as our underwater photographer. And my dad was showing him how to do this and that, and Dean just stood there with his hands in his pockets. And my dad said, Dean, don't let Jan see you with your hands in your pockets. And Dean just stood there. He didn't get down on his knees and help my dad in any way. He just kind of stood there and followed my dad around as my dad was showing him different chores. A little bit more time went by, and my dad said it again, Dean, don't let Jan see you with your hands in your pockets. Well, he never took his hands out of his pockets, and my dad went into my mom and said, I hate to tell you this, but he's not going to make it. And so that day, my mom called Dean in and said, Dean, this isn't the right job for you. We're going to have to let you go. Well, 2 weeks later, my mom got a letter from Dean. And the letter said, Jan, I want to thank you for hiring and firing me in the same day. I learned that I cannot eke my way through life. Well, let me tell you, Dean went on to do great things. He got married. He became an attorney. He's this awesome guy. And he runs into my dad years later. And he quickly says to his wife, come here. I want you to meet Blaine Thomas. And when he introduced her, he said, it's because of his wife that I was able to marry the caliber of girl so that I could marry you. Well, then, just 2 years ago, my mom ran into Dean at a funeral, and Dean was conducting that funeral. And Dean came up and gave my mom a big hug and said, he introduced his wife, and he said, because of you, I was able to marry a girl like her. What a difference it made. I don't know Dean's parents, but I can guarantee you that they taught him to take responsibility for what happened that day and not to play the role of a victim. What a difference the parent makes as to how the child copes when things don't go the way they wanted. When we blame an organization for not being inclusive, or blame a teacher, or the coach for putting another player in the game before ours, or make excuses for our child as to why he didn't show up or why he was in a bad mood, or when we are mad and upset, we wallow in self-pity because our child wasn't included or didn't get invited. When we act out in any of these ways, we are teaching our children to do the same. Now, I want you to watch and listen closely this next week and notice all those who play the role of a victim. You will notice it immediately if you watch the news and if you're watching politics. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. Both parties are blaming or making excuses all the time. This tells me that nothing is going to get done. Notice parents who are covering for their kids. Notice kids in your own family who are blaming their siblings or making excuses as to why they didn't get their homework done or why they skipped school or why they are mad. Notice teenagers who are wallowing in self-pity because they were not included or blaming you for grounding them or taking away their phone. In each of these cases, you will notice that the person playing the role of a victim is not happy and not changing or progressing. Now, going back to Holland, your experience in Holland is entirely up to you. If you choose to play the role of a victim or not, if you don't, you will move forward, progress, and be happy. If you choose to play the role of a victim, you will become your own worst enemy. So I'm going to challenge each of you to not play the role of a victim, but to take responsibility for your life, regardless whose fault it is, and teach your children the same. I promise you, it will allow you and your kids to change and progress and be happy. And isn't that ultimately what we all want? One last thing. The first time I ever talked to Daryl, who's my new husband, was when he called me to ask me out on the phone. I knew beforehand that he'd been caring for his wife the past 7 years before she passed away. The first thing I said to Daryl was, I am so sorry you lost your wife. He responded, oh, don't be sorry. What a privilege it was to be able to care for her here in mortality. It was at that moment that I knew he was different than any other guy I'd ever met. Not playing the role of a victim was at the top of my list in looking for a husband. I needed a man who was willing to change and grow and who was genuinely happy. Through my life experiences, I knew the damage we do to ourselves and our families when we play the role of victim. I have since learned that Daryl really is who I thought he was. He's the real deal, and how fun it is to change and grow and be happy together. Taking responsibility for our lives makes all the difference in the happiness we experience, whether we are in Italy or Holland. It's been great being with you again today. Now remember, hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you want to be notified of future podcasts. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.